Hello and welcome everyone. So I had this video suggested in my YouTube. So I remember the time when I played this game and just had a crazy idea to implement that. Maybe mimic matter ability from the game. It allows you to turn into any kind of physical object, even a coffee mug and that kind of stuff. Okay. So I wanted to try and replicate that ability inside of Unreal Engine. The original game was basically built in CryEngine, by the way. Okay. So just to give an overview, over here I have this first person template, okay, and I have placed these few static meshes that have set this property simulate physics to true, okay. So if I play this, I have this first person, and if I press my left mouse button, okay, I possess this and I can move it around like a physics object, okay, and it can jump, and if I can go over here, okay, so I can press my right mouse button to depossess it and become a person again, okay, a human being. And similarly for this physics object, okay, and it's even true for these cubes because these cubes also have physics, but they are really not much fun to play with, okay. So we'll be covering this inside of this tutorial, okay. So just to start off, what I want to do is just create a new folder called this tutorial, okay, and I'm going to give it a color, okay, just to differentiate it, okay. Now we actually need two classes for this, a player class and a pawn class, okay. So we'll start by a simple class, and that's going to be player class. So from my first person template, I'm going to drag this VB first person character and copy it over here, okay. Now I'm going to rename this to character underscore player character. Okay, so I'm going to open this and I'm going to delete a few useless things over here like this gamepad input. I don't need that, and I also don't need this touch input, and I also don't need this on use item because we'll be using the left mouse button as the mechanism to do a line trace and possess a physics object, okay. So inside of the event graph, first what I want to do is just create a function for the sphere trace, okay. So create a function for sphere trace, okay, and this is going to actually do a sphere trace by channel, this one, okay. And I'm going to drag out this first person camera because I want my trace to start from the location of this camera. So I'm going to say get world location. Okay, so this is going to be my start, and for the end I'm going to say get forward vector, and I want to multiply this by the range value. So I'm going to convert this to a float and use this as a input, and I'm going to add this to the starting position, okay, and this gives me my end, and I also can promote this radius to a variable, okay, and this is going to be called trace range, okay. So basically we multiply this trace range by the forward vector, so we are tracing this amount of time in the forward direction from this camera, okay. Trace the visibility channel, that's fine, okay. And from here I want to return a few things, okay. So I'm going to say break hit results, and I'm going to get the hit component and check is simulating physics, okay. So add a return note over here, okay, and I'm going to return this, and I am going to say is simulating physics. Now we also want to return this hit actor in case it is simulating physics, okay. So this is it for this function, and going back to our event graph, I'm going to use this function to do a sphere trace from the camera. The radius is going to be 20. Because this is a sphere trace, it's not going to shoot a single line, rather it's going to shoot a sphere that's of this radius, okay. The trace radius is going to be 2000 in the forward direction, okay. So I want to check if we are simulating physics. Actually want to do is spawn an actor that we can control specifically a pawn that we can control and move around. Okay, we'll create the pawn actor a little bit later, but we're going to create a function for that. It's going to be spawn and possess. Okay, so this function, what's going to do is going to spawn an actor. Okay, so just to make sure we don't leave this empty, I'm going to create that actor over here, and it's going to be of the type pawn. Okay, and call this pawn physics object. Okay, and I'm going to save these, and I'm going to use this over here. Okay, and I'm going to say make transforms. Okay, so we'll be setting this transform inside of this actor. Okay, and important thing to set is this instigator is going to be self. Okay, so we have set this up, and we are going to do some stuff over here a little bit later when we actually create that pawn actor. Okay, this actor. So just right now, what I'm going to do is just drag it from here and say possess. Oh, sorry, we have to get this from the player controller. So say get player controller. Okay, and drag it from here and say possess. So we actually want to possess this, or we also need to do some stuff over here as well. Okay, so going back to our event graph, what we want to do is just call this spawn and possess. Okay, and right now this is enough for this actor because we'll be changing a few things a little bit later when we have constructed our pawn physics object. Okay, so we go ahead and move inside of this. Okay, so right now it's empty, but we want to add a few things. Okay, so first of all, it's going to be spring arm. So basically this is going to be used for our camera movement. So I'm also going to add a camera, and under the default scene node I'm also going to add a static mesh. Okay, and call this object mesh. Okay, and I'm also going to set the simulate physics, but right now it cannot be set because this is empty. We search for paint bucket, and by the way, this is from the industrial prop pack. It was a free some time ago, I think. So okay, you can use any object if you want. Okay, you set the simulate physics to true, and I'm going to change the collision preset to custom and just set the visibility and camera channel to ignore, so our spring arm does not vibe with this. And talking about spring arm, I want to set a few parameters on this thing as well. Let me change this position to like -100 by 0 by 10. Okay, so this is over here, and we're going to give this camera a little bit of offset, and it's going to be about 150. Now these values are depending on the size of your object, so this might not work for this size of object, and it will work perfectly fine for this size of objects. Okay, so this is totally dependent on your game. Okay, so we have set this, and I also want to check this use pawn control rotation, so we can use our mouse to move this around. Now this setting, enable camera lag, allows you to smoothly move your mouse around when moving this physics object. This is not necessary, but it really makes the effect look good. Okay, without this it's going to look choppy and janky. Okay, so we're going to add few movement inputs for our physics objects, and then kind of stuff over here. Okay, so first of all, we need to actually update the location of the actor against this object mesh physics mesh. Okay, so I'm going to say set actor update location. Okay, and I'm going to drag this object mesh and say yes world location, and I'm going to say actor location. Okay, now because this object is not attached to this default scene root, so it's going to move around like so. Okay, even though the actor is over here, so we need this to be running on the tick to update the location of the actor. Okay, so once we have done this, we're going to add some movement input for our mouse. Okay, So because I'm using the first person template, so if you see inside of input, I have these axis mappings for look up and down mouse and turn right and left mouse. Okay, so I'm going to use these inputs over here. Say look up, down mouse. Okay, so I'm going to drag out from here and say add controller yaw input. Okay, so now good thing about these axis mapping are because they act like a tick function, I can call this event on these axis mapping rather than explicitly calling this on the event tick. So instead of using this event tick, I can just simply drag out from here and say set actor update location. Okay, so I don't need to use this because it's also firing every second. Well, technically not every second, but it's always firing until you stop moving your mouse for a long time. Okay, so I'm also going to add an event for look up down. Sorry, it's going to be turn left right. Turn left right mouse. Oh dear. So this is not going to be over here, it's going to be over here. Turn right is going to be this one, and look up down is going to be actually at controller pitch input. Okay, so up down is pitch and left and right is yaw. Okay, so we have these mouse inputs. I'm going to comment this. Okay, we have done this. Now we need to actually add some inputs for our movement, the forward, back, and left and right keys. Okay, so I'm going to just search for move forwards, backwards. Okay, and I'm going to drag out from here and say add force, because we'll be using force to move this physics object rather than just moving the pawn itself. Okay, and for the force, what I'm going to do is just multiply this by our variable, then I call this force. Okay, and I'm also going to move this relative to the camera. We say get forward vector. Okay, and drag out from here and say project vector onto plane. So basically this just maps the vector onto a plane. In this case I'm using the z plane, so it's parallel to this floor. Okay, if I'm able to explain what I'm saying. And I also want to multiply this by this value. Okay, and this is going to be my force, and I'm going to check this assertion change, and it's almost going to be similar for the move right and left, move right and left. This one is going to go over here, this one over here. Now instead of the forward vector of the camera, I want to say get right vector and use this as the vector projection. Okay, so we can name this as movement inputs. Okay, this is done. Now we also need some input for the jump as well. So I'm going to search for jump. Okay, we have this key mapping from the first person template. And now this is not going to work like the regular character blueprint because the jumping is handled by this character movement component, and we cannot add this to our pawn. Like technically we could add this, but this will not make this physics object work. So yeah, we need to check for if our physics object is in air. So I'm going to create a new function called this check in air. Okay, so inside of this, what I want to do is just do line trace by channel, this one. Okay, now it's going to do a line trace from this actor and say get world location, this one, and I'm going to say get up vector. Okay, and I'm going to multiply this up vector by a value, and I'm just going to float value is going to be like -50. So our trace start is going to be this location, and the end is going to be this location added to this vector. So basically what we're doing is tracing in the downward direction from the actor location. Okay, and if we are this units high, we are not going to jump. We are going to consider that our pawn is in air. Okay, so you can change this based upon your game. requirements. Okay, and I'm going to just check this and say not boolean, because we're going to be checking if we are in air. So if we are in air, this is going to return false, and I'm going to return this and this value and call this in air. So you can just name this not in air and just connect it directly instead of using this not. Okay, so I think it's it for this function, and going to our jumping, I'm going to call this function check in air. So if we are not in air, this is going to be false, and I'm going to do is say as impulse. Okay, so an impulse is like an instantaneous force applied to this object, and it's going to throw us into the air by the amount 500. Okay, so this also depends upon your game, how much high you want the physics mesh to jump. Okay, and now we are going to add a function to unpossess this physics object once we are done by playing this. So inside of a character we have this possession on the line trace, so we are going to do some sort of reverse thing for this unpossession. So I have already defined this input exit mesh on my right mouse button that I'm going to use to exit this physics mesh. So I'm going to just right click and say exit mesh, and also command this to jump. Okay, so over here what I want to do is just get the player controller. Now a nice thing would be to have all of these input inside of your player controller, so you don't have to define these functions for each and every pawn or character class, but what I'm doing is just being lazy and doing it over here. So let's possess, call this function possess, and we are going to possess the instigator. So drag out from here and say get instigator, this one. Okay, so this is going to be set up over here once we have actually finished declaring this function. Okay, so we are going to possess this, and we are going to say spawn actor from class. I don't know why it took me that long to type, and I'm going to search for static mesh actor. So now this is static mesh actor is actually a built-in class. You see over here, like this thing, this is actually a static mesh actor, as you can see inside of the world outliner. So every object placed in the world is like a actor, and this is a specific type static mesh actor. So once we have depossessed our actor, we actually want to spawn that actor back at that place and our character as well. Okay, so that's why I'm using this, and we're going to spawn the transform and say, if you drag out from here and say get world transforms, this one, and plug this in over here, and I'm going to say always spawn ignore collisions. Okay, and we're going to set a few parameters on this. We're going to set mobility. Okay, and this is going to be movable because we are going to respawn a physics object. Okay, and I also want to drag out from here and say set static mesh on the static mesh component. So it's going to be like so, and the new static mesh is going to be actually this one. Say get static mesh and use this over here. Okay, and I also want this to simulate physics, so I'm going to say set simulate physics. Okay, it's going to be simulating, and we want to destroy this actor. Not this static mesh actor, rather this spawn physics object, because we have spawned a static mesh actor in that place, and we don't need this pawn to be hanging around in the world. Okay, so I think this is it, and I'm missing a few steps. We also want to set the location of our player actor to this physics location, physics object mesh location. Okay, say set actor location. Okay, now this location is going to be this actor's location. Okay, and this is going to be teleports. We move instantaneous to this location. Okay, I think this is it. So I'm going to say this exit mesh. So I think our physics object is complete. So now we can move over at our player character and change a few settings over here. So if you are simulating physics and we are hitting up actor, okay. So if you are simulating physics, what we want to do is spawn and possess this actor. Okay, so we are going to spawn this and set its location as well. So instead of this, because we have this tick function updating our actor's location, so we can use this, set it at 0 and let the tick overtake this and set the correct location. Okay, so from here what you want to do is just say get object mesh, this one. Okay, and we are going to say set world transform. Okay, so it's going to be over here, and this is going to be teleport. And for these transforms, I'm going to actually promote this to this one because we'll be getting these from our hit scan. Okay, and I'm also going to drag her from here and say set static mesh, because I'm going to change the mesh to the mesh that we are targeting rather than just this default paint bucket. Okay, and new mesh is also going to be like this and input to this function. Okay, and finally we are going to possess this. Okay, so I think this is it for this function. And going back to our event graph, we want to set these parameters over here. So if you remember, we have this hit actor and say get actor transforms, and we'll be using this as these transforms. Okay, and we're also going to get this actor and say cast to static mesh. Now casting is bad, I know, but this is a cast to a default class, so it wouldn't overload your system that much. Okay, and say get static mesh component, and from here say get static mesh. Okay, so basically our hit actor is going to be a static mesh that plays in the world. Okay, and we're going to get that static mesh component like this bag, sandbag, and just set it as our new mesh over here in this function. And we are going to actually destroy this actor because we have possessed this and converted it to a pawn physics object. So we actually want to destroy the object that was originally a static mesh actor. Okay, because it's going to be replaced by this pawn physics object. Compile and save this. So I forgot one thing. It's going to be instead of this spawn and possess, we need to set this always spawn ignore collisions because it will not work without this. And the next step is just selecting this character and going to your world settings and checking this inside of the default class. Okay, if you don't see this, just go to this window and it's going to be over here, this one. Okay, so now if I play this and if I target this, we have possessed this. Okay, so we can move our, oh, I cannot move this because I forgot to set the default value of this force to something high. So this is going to be, I believe, about 1000. Okay, compile and save this. Let's go ahead and test it again. So this time let's possess this thing. Okay, so we have possessed this, and if I press my right mouse button, I have ejected. I also forgot one thing. We have to make this connection inside of the pawn physics object. Instead of this exit mesh, we need to actually connect this instigator to this to actually spawn at that location. Okay, so let's go ahead and test it out. So if I possess this bucket, we have possessed it, we can move this. Okay, so I move up this like so and press the right mouse button. We are placed at that location and we have this physics object back in the world. Okay, similarly we could possess this sandbag. Not much fun to play with, but we can still possess it. Okay, and press the right mouse button to eject it, and we'll have some camera problem with this. Okay, so remember, while making your physics object possessable, just remember this. Okay, And I also want to point out some other thing. Since I have possessed this from a first person character, my first person character is actually present over here. If I say show collision, okay, so you need to either set this first person location to something else, or just change the collision to no collision, and once you possess it back again, you can change the collision to normal pawn collision or character collision, whatever that is. Okay, so I think this is it. Have fun playing with it. Thank you very much.